The grand ballroom of the Aurelius Hotel shimmered under 1,000 lights. Golden chandeliers hung like constellations, casting a warm glow on polished marble floors. Waiters glided across the hall in crisp white gloves, balancing trays of champagne flutes that sparkled like liquid diamonds. Every corner of the space exuded wealth, crystal vases overflowing with roses, walls draped in velvet, a string quartet playing soft Mozart to fill the spaces between laughter. It wasn't just any night. This was the event of the season, a private gala hosted by Victor Harrington, a billionaire tycoon whose empire stretched from oil to tech to luxury real estate. He was the kind of man whose name alone could move markets. Tonight, senators, CEOs, foreign dignitaries, and the city's wealthiest elites had gathered under one roof to celebrate him, or more accurately, to stay in his good graces. Victor himself stood at the center of it all, a towering figure in a bespoke black tuxedo, his salt and pepper hair immaculately styled. His presence dominated the room without effort. Laughter boomed when he spoke, people leaned in to catch every word. To the guests, he was more than a man. He was power incarnate. At one corner of the hall, a young congressman whispered to his wife, "Do you realize a handshake with Victor tonight could mean campaign funding for years?" His wife nodded, eyes flickering nervously toward the billionaire, who was in animated conversation with the mayor. The air was thick with pride, arrogance, and the kind of confidence that only bottomless wealth can buy. And then, a voice. Small. Fragile. Barely above a whisper, yet slicing through the glamour like a blade. "Please, sir, may I have something to eat?" The music faltered. A violinist's bow slipped, screeching across the string. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned in unison, eyes narrowing, seeking the source of that timid plea. There, at the entrance of the grand ballroom, stood a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old. Her skin was the deep, rich brown of polished mahogany, her eyes wide and searching. A tangled mess of curls framed her small face. Her clothes, a faded yellow dress with fraying seams, 2 large shoes that flopped with every step, were worlds apart from the sequined gowns and silk suits around her. A thin backpack, worn at the edges, hung loosely from her shoulders. But more than anything, it was the look in her eyes that froze the room. A mixture of fear, hunger, and desperate courage. Who let her in here?" hissed a woman draped in emerald satin, clutching her pearl necklace as if a child were a thief. "Security," barked another man, tugging at his cufflinks. "This is a private event." A ripple of whispers coursed through the crowd like a rising tide. "She must be lost. Where are her parents? Good heavens, the nerve of these people letting street children wander into the Aurelius." The girl didn't move. She clutched the straps of her backpack tighter, her knuckles pale. Her eyes locked not on the sneering faces but on the glittering buffet table, rows of golden trays piled high with lobster tails, caviar, roasted lamb, pastries glazed with honey. Food enough to feed an entire orphanage. I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice trembling but audible in the heavy silence. I haven't eaten all day. Please, sir, could I have just a plate?" The audacity of her words struck the crowd like thunder. Guests exchanged incredulous looks, as though a child's hunger were an alien concept. A portly man near the front chuckled, swirling his wine. "Well, isn't that adorable? She thinks Victor Harrington runs a soup kitchen now." Laughter burst from a cluster of men in tuxedos. It wasn't kind laughter. It was sharp, mocking, the kind that reduces another human being to less than nothing. Victor himself, standing only a few feet away, slowly turned to face the intruder. His eyes, a cold steel gray, scanned her up and down. He said nothing at first, letting the weight of silence suffocate the moment. Finally, his lips curved into something between amusement and disdain. "Little one," he drawled, his voice smooth and commanding. "Do you know where you are?" The girl swallowed hard, her small body trembling under the gaze of 100 powerful eyes. A hotel, sir. This, Victor announced, gesturing grandly to the glittering hall, is not just a hotel. This is the Aurelius. Tonight, this ballroom holds the finest minds, the richest men and women, the leaders of nations. And you, he paused, allowing the hush to grow unbearable. You are, what exactly? She hesitated, her lips trembling. I'm hungry, sir. The laughter roared louder this time. Women shook their diamond-studded heads, men slapped each other's backs. A senator's wife muttered, God, this is pitiful. Someone take her away before she ruins the mood. But still, the girl did not back down. Her hands clutched her empty stomach, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Please, she whispered again, her voice barely audible over the cruel amusement. Just a little food. The contrast was unbearable. Behind her, through the open doorway, the city loomed, dark alleys, flashing neon signs, shadows of a world where children went hungry every night. Inside, the ballroom glowed with opulence, tables creaking under the weight of delicacies no one here would finish. And there she stood, on the threshold between two worlds. Victor stepped forward, his shoes clicking against the marble. Each step was deliberate, echoing across the silent hall. He stopped just inches away from her, towering above her tiny frame. He bent slightly, so his eyes were level with hers. You're very bold, he said softly, though his tone carried the weight of mockery. To interrupt my gala with this little performance. I wasn't trying to, she began, but his raised hand silenced her. Oh, don't be shy, he said, his smile widening. Look around, child. Do you know who these people are? Senators. Ambassadors. CEOs. And you've entertained them tonight. The courage it takes for a nobody to stand here. More laughter rippled, sharper this time. Her chin quivered, but her eyes, those wide, soulful eyes, did not look away. Victor straightened, turning back to the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask you, should we give this little one what she asks for? Yes, someone jeered sarcastically. Give her a crumb of bread, see if she performs tricks. Let her scrub the dishes in the kitchen, shouted another. Or maybe, a young man smirked, raising his champagne, she can sing us a song first. Earn her supper. Applause and laughter thundered again, cruel and echoing. Victor turned back to the girl, his expression hard to read. You hear them, don't you? You've interrupted kings and queens of this city. If you want food here, you must prove yourself worthy. Do you understand? The girl's small fists tightened at her sides. Her lips trembled, but she nodded. Good, Victor said smoothly, eyes glittering with a predator's amusement. Then let's make this entertaining. The crowd leaned in, sensing a show about to begin. The chandeliers glowed brighter, the music stilled, the air thick with cruel anticipation. And the little girl, the one everyone had dismissed as a nobody, stood her ground, a faint spark flickering in her eyes. The story had begun. The silence after Victor's words seemed to stretch for an eternity. The little girl stood there, trembling but upright, as the crowd of elites leaned forward with hungry curiosity. It wasn't sympathy that filled their eyes, it was the anticipation of sport. They wanted a spectacle. They wanted this fragile child to fail, and fail spectacularly. Victor's lips curved into a practiced smile, the kind that had disarmed investors and crushed rivals. You've made a bold request, little one. Food, in exchange for nothing. That is not how the world works, is it? A thin woman in pearls and a diamond tiara scoffed. She's clearly a beggar. Throw her out before she dirties the floor. But Victor raised a hand, silencing the protest. His voice deepened, carrying the weight of performance. He thrived on moments like this, when the entire room hung on his words. "No, no," he said smoothly. "This girl has courage. To walk into my gala, to stand before people who hold the world in their hands, and to ask for something as simple as a meal. That is, remarkable. Don't you agree?" A murmur of agreement fluttered through the crowd, not of admiration for the girl, but of fascination at Victor's showmanship. "Yes, remarkable," chuckled a senator. "But courage doesn't fill stomachs." Victor nodded gravely. "Quite right. So let us test her. If she succeeds, she earns her meal. If not," he turned sharply, his eyes slicing into the child. "She leaves this place immediately and never dares show her face among respectable people again." Gasps. A few claps. One man whistled approvingly. The girl's lips parted, her small voice carrying just enough for everyone to hear. What kind of test?" Victor straightened, pacing a few steps away, deliberately dragging out the suspense. He turned back with a glint in his eye. "What do you think, ladies and gentlemen? How shall our little guest earn her supper?" The suggestions poured in, cruel and careless. "Make her sing," shouted a woman, laughing. "Have her dance for us," another called. "Send her to the kitchen. Let her scrub pots," someone else jeered. Each suggestion was met with waves of laughter. The girl stood still, hands tightening around the straps of her worn backpack. Her eyes darted to the food table again, then back to Victor. Victor raised his hand again, silencing the noise. "No, no. This must be something worthy. Something impossible for a child from the streets." He paused, his voice dropping to a purr. "If she can surprise us, she eats." The crowd leaned in, delighted. The cruelty of the game was intoxicating to them. At that moment, a man at the far end of the hall spoke up. He was older, with silver hair and a calm demeanor, Dr. Elias Monroe, a world-renowned scholar invited to the gala as Victor's token intellectual guest. He adjusted his glasses, his sharp eyes studying the girl. "Victor," Dr. Monroe said, his voice carrying through the hush, "perhaps this is not wise. She's just a child." Victor smirked. "Precisely. Which makes it all the more entertaining. Besides, Elias, don't you agree? Even children must learn that nothing is free in this world." Dr. Monroe's gaze softened as it rested on the girl. Something about the way she stood, fragile yet unflinching, stirred something deep in him. But he said no more. Victor turned back to the girl. "Do you understand the terms?" She swallowed hard, her small voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "If I succeed, I eat. And if you fail?" Victor pressed. Her gaze flickered briefly to the mocking faces, then back to him. "Then I'll leave." A murmur of approval rippled through the guests. They were impressed not by her courage, but by Victor's mastery of the moment. "Excellent," Victor declared, his voice booming like a conductor striking the first note. "Then let us see what this little nobody is capable of." The crowd erupted in applause, a twisted parody of encouragement. The chandeliers seemed to shimmer brighter, the room charged with cruel excitement. The girl stepped forward, her small shoes squeaking against the polished marble. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat louder than the last. She knew the odds were stacked against her. She knew these people didn't want her to succeed. But somewhere, beneath the fear, a quiet flame burned. A memory of her grandmother's words, "When the world tries to make you small, stand tall. Let your truth speak louder than their laughter." She took a deep breath. "I accept." The crowd gasped again, some in delight, some in disbelief. A senator muttered, "The brat actually thinks she can do it." Victor's grin widened. He raised his glass, savoring the moment. "Then let the game begin." The quartet resumed playing softly, but the music was drowned by the murmurs and whispers that swept the ballroom. Everyone's attention was fixed on the little girl who had dared to challenge a billionaire's stage. Somewhere deep down, a few guests felt a flicker of unease. The sight of her, small, hungry, yet unbroken, clashed against the grandeur of their world. But none dared voice it. For now, all that mattered was the spectacle. The girl stood alone in a sea of glittering wealth, her fate hanging in the balance of a cruel game. And the impossible test was about to be revealed. Victor Harrington stood tall at the center of the ballroom, basking in the attention. For him, this was more than a gala now, it was theater. The girl, frail and trembling before the glittering crowd, had unwittingly become his stage prop. He raised a hand for silence. The quartet stopped again. Even the clinking of champagne glasses ceased. Ladies and gentlemen, Victor's voice rang out, smooth and commanding, our guest has agreed to prove herself. But what challenge shall we set? What is fitting for such boldness? The question was rhetorical, but the guests answered anyway. Have her sing, one man jeered. No, make her dance, another laughed. Send her to recite Shakespeare. Let her sweep the floor like she's meant to. Each suggestion drew cruel laughter. The girl lowered her eyes briefly, her small hands clutching the straps of her worn backpack. For a moment, she seemed as though she might crumble. But then she lifted her gaze again, and though her lips trembled, her eyes carried a spark, a stubborn refusal to break. Victor pretended to weigh the options, stroking his chin theatrically. Then, with a flourish, he turned toward the stage at the end of the hall. There it stood, a gleaming Steinway grand piano, polished ebony reflecting the chandelier's golden light. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Perfect, Victor said, his grin spreading. Music. The universal language. Let us see if our little guest can speak it. The girl blinked, her breath catching. The piano seemed to glow like a dream. Her fingers twitched slightly, as though remembering something long lost. Victor continued, his tone mocking but smooth. It is simple. Play us something. Anything. If you can make us believe you belong in this room, the feast is yours. He gestured toward the buffet, its trays of lobster and lamb glistening under the lights. If not, you walk out hungry. Forever. The guests erupted in laughter again. She's never even seen a piano before, I'll bet. This will be over in seconds. Imagine the squeaks and bangs she'll produce, oh, it will be hilarious. But not everyone laughed. Dr. Elias Monroe, standing quietly at the edge of the hall, narrowed his eyes. He had seen something, the way her fingers twitched unconsciously, the reverence in her gaze when she looked at the piano. It wasn't the look of a stranger. It was recognition. He leaned toward the woman beside him and whispered, watch closely. There's more to this child than they realize. The girl's small chest rose and fell as she tried to steady her breathing. Her grandmother's voice echoed faintly in her memory, music doesn't lie, my dear. When the world won't listen to your words, let your music speak for you. Victor spread his arms wide. Well? Do you accept, little one? All eyes burned into her. 100 powerful gazes, dripping with contempt and curiosity. The room seemed to shrink around her, the marble floors stretching endlessly to the piano that gleamed like a beacon. She swallowed hard. Her voice was soft, but steady. I accept. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Victor clapped once, sharply. Excellent. Then take your place, child. Show us what you can do. The girl began her slow walk toward the piano. Each step echoed louder than it should have, her shoes too big, flopping against the marble floor. The crowd whispered as she passed, some snickering, others shaking their heads. Poor thing. This will be over quickly. She'll embarrass herself. She's braver than I thought, though, foolish, but brave. As she walked, she caught fragments of their mockery. Her cheeks flushed, her throat tightened. But she didn't stop. The piano loomed closer, and with each step, a strange calm began to settle over her. Her heart still pounded, but the closer she drew, the more familiar everything seemed. She remembered long nights at her grandmother's side, the dim light of a small lamp, the old upright piano that had been both friend and teacher. She remembered the gentle hands guiding hers, the warm voice saying, "Music is your refuge. No one can take it from you." She reached the piano bench. Her small hand brushed across the glossy surface. It was cool to the touch, smooth like glass. She pulled out the bench, her movements deliberate, almost instinctive. "Look at her," someone sneered. "She doesn't even know how to sit." But Dr. Monroe, watching closely, caught the way she adjusted the bench to the perfect height, the way she sat with a straight back, poised and ready. His heart quickened. These were not the fumbling motions of a novice. The girl placed her backpack gently on the floor, then set her hands above the keys. For a moment, she hovered there, not touching, only breathing. The crowd chuckled. Someone called out, "What's the matter? Forgot where middle C is?" Victor raised a glass. "Well, little one. Play." The girl closed her eyes. She could almost hear her grandmother's laugh, could almost smell the faint lavender that always clung to her sweater. The memory steadied her. She opened her eyes. And pressed the first key. The note rang out, clear, resonant, not the hesitant sound of a child banging aimlessly. The crowd's laughter faltered. Heads tilted. Another note. Then another. A melody began to form, delicate yet confident. The girl's shoulders relaxed as the music took her. Her fingers, small but precise, danced across the keys with surprising grace. Each note was deliberate, each phrase carried weight. She wasn't fumbling. She wasn't guessing. She was playing. The ballroom fell into silence. The only sound was the cascade of notes filling the air, weaving through the chandeliers, wrapping around the stunned guests like invisible threads. Victor's smug smile flickered, just for a moment. His steel-gray eyes narrowed. This was not the bumbling disaster he had expected. Dr. Monroe's lips parted slightly in awe. He leaned forward, whispering under his breath, "Good God, she knows what she's doing." But for the girl, there was no billionaire, no glittering crowd, no laughter. There was only the piano, only the music flowing from somewhere deep within her, as though her grandmother's spirit guided every movement. The melody swelled. Guests who had been smirking now stood frozen, champagne glasses forgotten in their hands. A waiter, halfway across the room, stopped in his tracks, the tray balanced on one hand as he stared in disbelief. The little girl, the one they had called a nobody, was commanding the entire room with nothing but her touch on the keys. And this was only the beginning. The first notes floated through the grand ballroom like fragile glass, so soft that even the chandeliers seemed to hold their breath. It wasn't the clumsy noise of a child fumbling with ivory keys, it was something else. Something deliberate. Something alive. The girl's small fingers danced across the piano, hesitant for only a heartbeat before finding their rhythm. She pressed forward, her body leaning into the melody as though she were pouring herself into the instrument. Each note shimmered, resonating with a clarity that cut through the heavy silence. At first, the crowd didn't know how to react. They had been primed to laugh, to revel in her failure. But as the melody swelled, their laughter died in their throats. The cruel smirks froze on their faces. Champagne glasses hovered mid-air, untouched. One by one, the guests turned fully toward the stage. "This can't be," whispered the emerald-draped woman, her pearls clutched tightly. "She's playing, properly," muttered a senator, blinking as if he had seen a ghost. But Dr. Elias Monroe stood motionless at the back of the hall, his sharp eyes glistening. He knew. He had recognized the signs the moment she adjusted the bench, the way her hands had hovered above the keys with confidence. Now, as the music poured from her, his suspicions solidified into certainty. This was not the sound of a beginner. This was mastery. The girl's world dissolved into the piano. She no longer heard the whispers. She no longer saw the chandeliers or the marble floor. All she felt was the music, flowing through her like a river breaking free of a dam. Each note carried memory, her grandmother's laughter, the dusty sunlit room where she had first touched an old upright piano, the nights she had played on an imaginary keyboard in shelters when hunger gnawed at her belly. Her grandmother's words echoed, "Music is truth. And truth will always find its way." Her small shoulders straightened. Her fingers moved faster, more precise, weaving emotion into every phrase. The music rose and fell like a storm, gentle one moment, thunderous the next. The guests were transfixed. A waiter with a tray of glasses had frozen entirely, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. A dignitary's wife dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, though she could not explain why. Even the mayor, who prided himself on being unimpressed by everything, leaned forward with unblinking attention. The shift in the room was palpable. Where mockery had filled the air only moments before, now there was awe. Where cruelty had thrived, now silence reigned, reverent, almost sacred. Victor Harrington's smile had vanished. He stood at the edge of the stage, his jaw tight, his steel-gray eyes narrowing with each perfect note. He had expected humiliation, entertainment. Instead, he was watching his gala, his control, slip away. The girl wasn't just playing. She was commanding. And worse, she was winning them over. Victor's grip on his champagne glass tightened. This was not supposed to happen. The girl leaned deeper into the keys, her eyes closing. The melody shifted, blossomed, pulling at heartstrings invisible but undeniable. She played not just with skill but with a depth far beyond her years. Every rise and fall carried emotion, every pause lingered just long enough to ache. Her music told a story. Of hunger and loss. Of dignity crushed and rebuilt. Of a child who had known pain yet still believed in beauty. Tears welled in the corners of Dr. Monroe's eyes. He whispered, almost to himself, "This child, she is extraordinary." A woman beside him sniffled, lowering her glass. How is this possible?" Monroe shook his head slowly. "It's not just talent. It's soul." The performance reached its crescendo. The girl's hands moved with breathtaking speed, yet every note was clear, controlled. Her small frame seemed too fragile to command such power, yet the sound shook the very bones of the room. Guests who had sneered now sat frozen, unable to look away. Their laughter had been replaced by the pounding of their own hearts, matching the rhythm of her playing. And then, as suddenly as the storm had risen, it subsided. The melody softened, notes falling like gentle rain, delicate, deliberate. Each keystroke was a whisper, a confession. The final note lingered, stretching into silence. The girl held her hands above the keys, letting the echo fade into the vastness of the hall. For a moment, she didn't move, as though she too was unwilling to break the spell. Then, slowly, she lowered her hands to her lap. Silence. The entire ballroom sat motionless, caught in the afterglow of something they could not yet name. The first sound to break the silence was a single clap. Dr. Monroe, his face wet with tears he hadn't realized had fallen, brought his hands together with deliberate force. The sound rang out, startling in its clarity. The room turned toward him. Then another clap. And another. Soon, the ballroom erupted into applause, thunderous, reluctant at first, then overwhelming. Guests rose to their feet, some cheering, others clapping as though trying to rid themselves of guilt. The girl sat still on the bench, her chest heaving, her eyes wide. For a fleeting moment, she wasn't a hungry child in torn clothes. She wasn't a nobody. She was the center of their world. Victor's jaw clenched. His guests, his audience, were standing, applauding a girl he had meant to humiliate. This was no longer his stage. It was hers. She rose slowly from the bench, her legs trembling but her posture tall. She turned to face the crowd. No longer did she seem frail and timid. There was dignity in the way she stood, her small chin raised, her eyes unflinching. The same people who had mocked her now avoided her gaze, ashamed. Victor forced a laugh, trying to seize control. "Well, well," he said loudly, his voice cutting through the applause. "A charming trick. Surely she memorized that piece from some video on the internet. Nothing more." The crowd's applause faltered, some hesitating, unsure how to respond. But Dr. Monroe stepped forward, his voice clear and firm. "No. That was no trick. That was artistry. This child is no ordinary street girl. She is a prodigy." The word hung in the air like thunder. Gasps rippled through the hall. And Victor's carefully built world of mockery began to crumble. The applause thundered on, echoing through the golden hall. Guests who had sneered moments before were now clapping furiously, desperate to erase their own shame. Some stood on tiptoe, straining for a better look at the child who had just humbled them all. But she didn't bow. She didn't smile. She simply stood beside the piano, her small figure poised with quiet dignity, as though she had expected this moment all along. Dr. Elias Monroe approached slowly, his polished shoes clicking against the marble. The applause softened as eyes turned toward him. His face bore an expression somewhere between awe and urgency, as if he were on the brink of a discovery. "Child," he said gently, his voice reverent. "May I ask you something?" The girl looked up at him, her eyes cautious but unafraid. "Yes, sir." "What is your name?" Her lips trembled as she answered, "My name is Naomi Carter." The name hung in the air like a stone dropped into still water. For most, it meant nothing. But for Dr. Monroe, it struck like lightning. His eyes widened. He took a step back, then forward again, searching her face as if it might confirm the truth. "Carter," he whispered. "Are you related to Eleanor Carter?" The girl nodded once, slowly. "She was my grandmother." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Whispers flared like wildfire. "Eleanor Carter? The pianist? I thought she died years ago. She was a legend." Victor Harrington's eyes narrowed. He knew the name. Everyone in that room did, though some preferred not to remember. Eleanor Carter had been one of the greatest pianists of her generation, a black woman whose talent had outshone her time. But she had been denied the grand stages, shut out of conservatories, rejected from concert halls. Doors had closed not because she lacked brilliance, but because of prejudice. And now, standing before them, was her granddaughter. Dr. Monroe's voice quivered with urgency. "I studied under your grandmother," he confessed, his eyes glistening. "Eleanor Carter taught me when I was a boy. She gave me my foundation. I owe her everything. And you," he gestured toward the piano. "You carry her gift." The girl's eyes softened. "She taught me too, sir. Every night, until her voice cracked. Until she passed." The crowd was stunned into silence. This was no trick. No random miracle. This girl carried the bloodline of a musical giant, a legacy hidden from their eyes because of their assumptions. A senator muttered, "Good God," and we mocked her. His wife elbowed him sharply, her face flushed with shame. Victor, however, clenched his jaw. He refused to let the tide slip from his grasp. "Legacy or not," he said loudly, his voice slicing through the whispers, "she is still nothing more than a girl in rags, begging for food. Do not forget where she stands." Some nodded uneasily, clinging to his authority. But others shifted uncomfortably. The ground was shifting beneath them, and they knew it. Dr. Monroe faced Victor, his tone sharp. "No, Victor. Do not diminish what we have witnessed tonight. This child is not just a girl in rags. She is the living proof that greatness cannot be silenced by circumstance. Applause began again, softer, but sincere. This time, it was not just admiration for her playing. It was respect. Naomi lowered her eyes, her small fists clenched. Her grandmother's voice whispered in her memory, "One day, they will see you. Not as nothing. Not as less. They will see your truth." And tonight, they had. But the night was far from over. Because Naomi carried not only her grandmother's legacy, she carried a truth none of them yet suspected. And that truth would shake the room to its core. The ballroom was still humming with whispers of Eleanor Carter's name. Some guests wore expressions of shame, others of disbelief. The little girl, Naomi, stood tall beside the Steinway, her face calm despite the storm she had just unleashed. Victor Harrington, however, was not ready to yield. His eyes narrowed, his hand tightening around his glass as though he might crush it. He had built his empire on control, on bending every room to his will. And yet tonight, a child had turned the spotlight away from him. He forced a chuckle, cold and sharp. A touching story. Truly. But let's not lose ourselves in sentiment. She may be Eleanor Carter's granddaughter, but talent alone doesn't change reality. Look at her. She came here begging. That's all she is. A few of his cronies nodded, desperate to stay in his favor. But many others shifted uneasily. They had seen too much to dismiss her so easily now. Naomi tilted her head, her eyes locking on Victor's. There was no fear in her gaze, only something calm, something deliberate. "You're wrong," she said softly. Her voice was quiet, but it carried across the hushed hall. "I didn't come here begging. I came here to see the truth." Murmurs flared again. Victor sneered. "The truth? And what truth is that, child?" Naomi's small hand reached down to her backpack. She unzipped it slowly, deliberately, as though she were unveiling something sacred. The crowd leaned forward, curiosity gripping them. From inside, she pulled out a small, black device. A camera. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Victor's smile faltered. "What is that?" Naomi held it up with steady hands. "Every moment since I walked into this room has been recorded. The way you laughed at me. The way they mocked me." Her eyes swept the crowd, and many guests shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. "The world will see it all." Panic rippled through the room like a sudden gust of wind. She was recording. Impossible. Turn that thing off. Victor stepped forward, his voice booming. "You dare. Do you have any idea who you are dealing with? This is my gala, my hotel, my name." Naomi didn't flinch. "And now it's also your truth. The truth you wanted hidden. The truth about how you and your guests treat a hungry child." Dr. Monroe's lips curved into a faint, satisfied smile. He understood now why she had walked into this den of wolves. Victor barked to security at the doors. "Confiscate it. Now." But before they could move, Naomi's small voice rang out again. "It's too late." The words dropped like stones into the silence. Her eyes glittered. "There are more cameras." The crowd gasped again. Naomi lifted her chin. "Hidden in this room. Every laugh. Every insult. Every cruel word. They're already uploaded. Tonight, the world will see what you tried to hide." A senator's face went pale. His wife clutched his arm in horror. The emerald-draped woman shook her head furiously, whispering, "This will ruin us." Victor's face turned red with fury. He stormed toward the girl, but Monroe stepped between them, his voice sharp. "Enough, Victor. You wanted a spectacle, now you have one." The billionaire froze, glaring at Monroe, then at the girl. His power was slipping like sand through his fingers. Naomi turned back to the crowd. Her small voice, steady and unwavering, filled the hall. You think I'm nobody. But tonight, I saved you. I saved you from your lies. From the mask you were in front of the world. Now everyone will see who you really are. Her words struck harder than any blow. The hall was silent, filled only with the sound of shallow, panicked breathing. Faces flushed with guilt, eyes darted toward exits, but there was nowhere to run. Victor's empire of control had cracked, shattered by the courage of a child who refused to bow. And though the night was far from over, the balance of power had shifted forever. The Aurelius ballroom had never known such silence. Only minutes before, it had thrummed with laughter, music, and arrogance. Now, all that remained was fear. Fear in the darting eyes of senators and socialites, fear in the trembling hands of CEOs who realized every cruel word they had spoken was captured forever. Naomi stood at the center of it all, small yet unshakable, her worn dress and scuffed shoes a sharp contrast to the velvet gowns and tuxedos around her. She clutched the small camera in her hand like a shield, though she no longer needed it, the truth was already loose, unstoppable. Victor Harrington's face had darkened to the color of storm clouds. His jaw clenched so tight the vein in his temple throbbed. "You, foolish child," he growled. "Do you think the world will believe you? Do you think anyone will care?" Naomi tilted her chin, her voice calm, certain. "They'll believe what they see. And they'll see everything." The billionaire stepped closer, towering over her, his shadow long across the polished marble. "I built this city. I own the press. I control the narrative. By tomorrow morning, no one will even remember your name." But Dr. Elias Monroe moved between them again, his voice firm, his presence commanding. "No, Victor. By tomorrow morning, the world will remember her name. And yours, for very different reasons." A murmur of agreement rippled through the guests. Some nodded reluctantly, others lowered their eyes in shame. The tide was turning, and Victor knew it. For the first time in years, he looked uncertain. Naomi turned to face the room. Her small voice carried, steady as a drumbeat. "You called me nobody. You laughed when I was hungry. But tonight, I saved you, not with money, not with power, but with truth. And now, everyone will know what kind of people you really are." Heads dropped. A senator's wife covered her face with trembling hands. The emerald-draped woman muttered, "Will be destroyed." Victor's fist slammed against the piano lid, the sharp crack echoing through the hall. "Enough," he roared. "This farce is over." But the words rang hollow. No one moved to obey him. No security stepped forward. His power, once absolute, now felt brittle, shattered by the simple courage of a child. Naomi stepped closer to him, her eyes unwavering. "You tried to make me small. But I'm not small. Not anymore." For a moment, Victor could only stare, caught between fury and disbelief. This girl, this nobody, had undone him before his own court. The following weeks moved faster than anyone in that ballroom could have imagined. Clips of Naomi's entrance, the cruel laughter of the guests, and her breathtaking performance at the piano exploded across social media. Millions watched in stunned silence as the narrative unfolded, the hungry child mocked, the prodigy revealed, the hypocrisy exposed. Headlines screamed. "Little girl outsmarts billionaire at his own gala." "Nobody to prodigy, the child who shamed the elite." Victor Harrington humiliated in viral recording. Sponsors pulled out of Harrington's ventures. Politicians who had once fawned over him now distanced themselves, erasing photographs and deleting posts. The Aurelius Hotel issued a public apology, scrambling to salvage its reputation. And Victor? For the first time in his life, doors closed in his face. The empire he had ruled through fear and wealth began to crack. He became a symbol not of power, but of arrogance brought low. Naomi, on the other hand, was lifted higher than she had ever dreamed. Dr. Monroe took her under his wing, introducing her to conservatories and concert halls that had once shut their doors to her grandmother. Invitations poured in from across the world, recitals, scholarships, mentorships. She became more than a child pianist, she became a voice, a reminder that greatness could come from the most overlooked corners. At her first public recital weeks later, the hall was packed. Not with elites in diamonds, but with families, students, young dreamers who saw themselves in her. She sat at the piano, her fingers trembling only for a moment before finding strength. As she played, she knew her grandmother was with her, every note a promise fulfilled. And the Aurelius Gala? It was remembered not for Victor's wealth, nor for the guests' power, but for the night a little girl walked into their golden fortress and toppled it with nothing but truth and music. In homes and classrooms across the country, her story was told and retold. Teachers spoke of her courage. Parents pointed to her as proof that dignity mattered more than riches. Children whispered her name as inspiration. Naomi Carter. The girl who saved the powerful, by exposing who they really were. The night Naomi Carter walked into Victor Harrington's gala began as a spectacle of arrogance and wealth. It ended as a lesson the world would never forget. A child who had been dismissed as nobody stood tall before the most powerful people in the city and reminded them of something they had long forgotten, that dignity cannot be bought, that truth cannot be silenced, and that greatness often wears the face of the overlooked. Victor Harrington had wealth, power, and influence. But none of those things could shield him from the truth revealed by a hungry little girl. His laughter had mocked her, his challenge had sought to crush her, and yet, in the end, it was his world that crumbled. Naomi, in her torn dress and oversized shoes, carried no riches, no titles. What she carried was far greater, her grandmother's legacy, her unshakable courage, and the music that lived inside her. With those alone, she brought an empire of arrogance to its knees. And so the story spread, not just across newspapers and television screens, but through whispers in classrooms, through conversations at dinner tables, through hearts inspired by her strength. The lesson was clear. It is not money that defines us. It is not status, or the names on guest lists, or the glimmer of chandeliers. It is how we treat those with nothing to give us in return. It is the compassion we show when no one is watching. It is the truth we live by, even when the world would rather look away. Naomi's courage revealed more than hypocrisy that night. It revealed possibility. That the voiceless can speak. That the powerless can rise. That even the smallest, hungriest child can carry within her the strength to change everything. Narrator's voice softens, addressing the audience directly. And now, as you listen to her story, the question is no longer about Naomi, or Victor, or the glittering halls of the Aurelius Hotel. The question is about you. When you meet someone the world has dismissed, will you laugh? Or will you listen? When you see someone hungry, or hurting, or overlooked, will you turn away? Or will you see the truth shining in their eyes? Because dignity is not reserved for the wealthy. Greatness is not locked behind gold-plated doors. It lives in the courage of those who dare to speak when the world tells them to be silent. Naomi Carter was called a nobody. But she proved that even a so-called nobody can save the powerful, not with wealth or strength, but with truth. Her story reminds us all, dignity is greater than money. Humanity is greater than status. And sometimes, the least expected voices carry the most extraordinary songs. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about what really matters, then don't let it end here. Share it. Remember it. Carry its truth into your own life. And if you want to hear more stories that prove how greatness rises from the most unlikely places, subscribe, stay with us, and never forget. The world may call someone a nobody. But sometimes, a nobody is exactly who saves us all.